Section number 19 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Humorous Readings and Recitations, edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 19. Married to a Giantess, by Walter Park. I loved her with all my heart, and indeed it took all my heart to accomplish the feat, for, in sooth, there was a great deal, a very great deal, of her to love. Although only sweet 17, she had reached the commanding stature of 9 feet 9 inches, and to use the words of a familiar advertisement, she was still growing. From my childhood I had doted on the gigantic, loved the lofty, admired the massive, and had a weakness for strength. The tales I best loved were those of giants. Can you wonder, then, that when I heard that the celebrated Samothracian giantess, Goliathina Imensikov, from the wilds of Wallachia, the largest woman in the world, was approaching London, my soul was stirred by the news as by a trumpet call? I read with the deepest interest the accounts of her antecedents. I learnt how she was discovered in the wilds of Wallachia by Whiteley, the world's provider, who had taken her from the bosom of her family, and here I could not help exclaiming, "What a stupendous bosom that family must have had!" As I reclined on my sofa, smoking the largest possible meerschaum, and reading with absorbed interest the accounts of one who was certainly born to greatness, I suddenly came to a terrific and almost appalling resolve. Involuntarily I exclaimed loud, "She shall be mine!" Yet how could I hope for success? To win so great a being one must be not only a lady killer, but a giant killer also, and though I bear a big name myself, Hector Gogmagog, nature has denied me either extraordinary personal attractions or lofty stature. How hopeless, then, for me to aspire to the affection of monumental maiden of Samothracia. 5 feet 5 pitted against 9 feet 9 is to be pitied indeed. But love laughs at obstacles. That evening I went to the Royal Escurial Theatre, where Mademoiselle Goliathina was performing, and sat enthralled to witness her impersonation of the Queen of Brobdingnag. The pictures had not exaggerated. She was every inch a queen, a phrase of some significance when the number of inches mounts up to 117. The next step was to get an introduction. This I accomplished to my satisfaction, and though at first naturally overawed by her Leviathan aspect, thenceforward my wooing proceeded rapidly. I had several interviews with the colossal charmer, at which I had the satisfaction of discovering that I was more in her eyes than some other men who were nearer to herself in point of stature. Words of encouragement coming from those lips so near and yet so far away, words spoken in soft Wallachien, yet in tones that Stentor might have envied, elevated me to the 7th heaven of pride and delight. I already felt taller by inches, but what was that to her 9 feet 9? I sent her the very biggest bouquets, such as occupied a whole hansom cab each. Love letters, their weight barely covered by 8 stamps, and valentines that would only go by parcels delivery. All this had its effect. She would have been less than woman, instead of a very great deal more, had she been insensible to my devotion. Can I ever forget what the poet ecstatically calls the first kiss of love? How, at considerable inconvenience to herself, she bent that statuesque form to accommodate herself to my limited stature. That was, indeed, stooping to conquer. Yet with all this encouragement, it was in fear and trembling that I approached the momentous question. Fancy a refusal from those lips! It would be crushing indeed. "Dearest Goliathina," I said, standing upon the head of the sofa, in order to place myself upon something like her own exalted level, "say, oh, say you will be mine. You may be sure of my lifelong devotion. You will be all in all to me, and in fact, much more than all, for you are far too large to be merely my better half. I shall always make much of you, and look up to you as one infinitely above me. Fortunately, I have a large heart, but as you occupy it entirely, it would be perfectly impossible for me to find room for any other object. Were you to reject me, there would be immeasurable void in my life, and who else is capable of filling it?" She was evidently affected, for what the poet calls a big round tear, and goodness knows how big round tear it was in this case, could be perceived starting from each of her moon-like eyes. I clasped her hand, which in point of length was a foot, and she did not withdraw it. "Fondest Hector," she responded, "I am thine." And she leant her head upon my shoulder. I staggered, but by the exertion of all my strength I was able for some moments to sustain the delicious burden. Our wedding took place before the registrar, who, being of a nervous temperament, was so overwhelmed at the towering dimensions of the bride that he could scarcely get through the ceremony. It was all as private as so abnormal an affair could possibly be kept, and for a time the famous female colossus figured no longer at the royal escurial as Queen Brobdingnag, a substitute only 6 feet 2 inches having been provided. Marrying a giantess has its inconveniences. I had to have a house built with exceptionally lofty rooms, and doors 10 feet high, with furniture on a corresponding scale. An ordinary carriage was of no use to my wife, whose size also frightened the horses, so we had a sort of triumphal car built, drawn by a circus elephant. It was expensive, but an excellent advertisement in a theatrical sense. She could never walk out without being mobbed, and terrifying babies. She dared not visit a friend's house for fear of frightening the children and destroying the furniture. And fancy at her a dance! Moreover, our housekeeping expenses were something frightful. Anon, darker shadows hovered around our domestic sphere. Her temper proved to be at times uncertain. At the least attempt to thwart any of her strange caprices, she grew infuriated, and when annoyed she had a way of putting me on the top of a high bookcase, or locking me up in a cupboard, box, or trunk, for I have said all our belongings were on a gigantic scale, which was peculiarly humiliating. About this time we became acquainted with Morlock Mastodon, Drum Major to His Highness the Grand Duke of Samothracia. The Major, though of small stature compared with my wife, was considered a giant by ordinary men, being 7 feet 10 in height. My fondness for giants rendered him an eligible acquaintance to me. Mrs. Gogmagog naturally took to one of her own gigantic species, and the Major was pleased to say that ours was the only comfortable and commodious house in England. He meant the only one in which the doors were 10 feet high, and the chair seats 4 feet from the ground. Anyhow, he soon made himself at home with us. Too much at home, as I couldn't help thinking. I didn't mind him and my wife being good friends, but when, in their gigantic loftiness, they seemed to overlook me altogether, I began to entertain natural feelings of jealousy. Besides, the Major owed me money, large sums in proportion to his size, which he had borrowed under the obviously false pretence that he was very short just now, and seemed in no hurry to pay it back. What could I do? It was rather a risky thing to expostulate with a man of 7 foot 10, and to turn him out of the house would have been a task altogether beyond my physical strength. At all events I could resolve that he should never enter it again, and I gave strict injunctions that always in future when Major Mastodon called there was to be nobody at home. Moreover, I actually summoned up courage to tell my wife of my resolution, and even to remonstrate with her upon her own demeanour towards the gallant and gigantic Major. Then she got into a rage, and such a rage! Heavens! What had I done? What would become of me? I was as one who had called down upon his devoted head the wrath of the gods or of the Titans. She drew herself up to her full height of nearly 10 feet. Her eyes glared like those of a demoniac, and grasped my arm in her Herculean clutch. She lifted me bodily from the ground. "Hands off!" I exclaimed, struggling. "Hit one your own size." "My own size!" she thundered, in a contralto profundo voice that shook the very roof. "Where am I to find 'em? The only person approximating to my own size you have forbidden the house. You dare try and control my actions. You, whom I could crush like a blue bottle, attempt to dictate to me. I will stand this no longer. You have offended me once too often. You die." "Beware, fearful female!" I gasped. "Colossal as you are, the arm of the law is still longer and even stronger than yours. Kill me, and you will assuredly die for it." She gave a laugh of scorn. "Me!" she cried. "Do you believe they would hang me? No, I am above all laws, and I have sworn that you shall die." And in spite of all my struggles she flung me, as easily as if I had been a doll, right out of the 3rd-story window. Down I fell, down, down, till I found myself on the floor. I had tumbled off the sofa, and so awakened from my terrific dream. Heavens! What a relief to find that after all I was not married to a giantess, that it was all a vision due to my falling asleep over the advertisement, and that Mademoiselle Gothelina was but a gigantic nightmare. End of section 19. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Section number 20 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Humorous Readings and Recitations, edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 20. The Vision of the Alderman, by Henry S. Lee. An alderman sat at a festive board, quaffing the blood-red wine, and many a bacchanal stave outpoured, in praise of the fruitful vine. Turtle and salmon and Strasburg pie, pippins and cheese were there, and the bibulous alderman winked his eye, for the sherry was old and rare. But a cloud came o'er his gaze eftsoon, and his wicked old orbs grew dim. Then drink turned each of the silver spoons to a couple of spoons for him. He bowed his head at the festive board, by the gaslight's dazzling gleam. He bowed his head and slept and snored, and he dreamed a fearful dream. Far, carried away on the wings of sleep, his spirit was onward borne, till he saw vast holiday crowds in Chepe, on a 9th November morn. Guns were booming and bells dingy-donged, Ethiop minstrels played, and still, whenever the burglars thronged, brisk jongleurs drove their trade. Scarlet sheriffs, the city's pride, with a portly presence filled the whole of the courtyard just outside the hall of their ancient guild. And in front of the central gateway there a marvellous chariot rolled, like gingerbread at a country fair, 'twas covered with blazing gold. And a being, arrayed in pomp and pride, was brought to the big stone gate, and they begged that being to mount and ride in that elegant coach of state. But oh, he was fat, so ghastly fat was that being of pomp and pride, that in spite of many attempts thereat, he couldn't be pushed inside. That being was pressed, but pressed in vain, till the drops bedewed his cheek. The gilded vehicle rocked again, and the springs began to creak. The slumbering alderman groaned a groan, for a vision he seemed to trace, some horrible semblance to his own, in that being's purple face. And oh, he cried as he started up, sooner than come to that, farewell for ever the baneful cup, and the noxious turtle fat. They carried him up the winding stair, they laid him upon the bed, and they left him sleeping the sleep of care, with an ache in his night-capped head. By permission of Messrs. Chatto and Windus. End of section 20. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Section number 21 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Humorous Readings and Recitations, edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 21. Demon Snuffers, by Geo Manville Fenn. I'm not at all given to parading my troubles. Nothing of the kind. I may be getting old. In fact, I am. And I may have had disappointments such as have left me slightly irritable and peevish. But I ask, as a man who wouldn't be troubled in his nerves if he had suffered from snuffers. Snuffers? Yes, snuffers, a pair of cheap black iron snuffers, that screech when they are opened, and creak when they are shut, a pair that will not stay open, nor yet keep shut, a pair that gape at you incessantly, and point at you a horrid sharp iron beak, as a couple of leering eyes turn the finger and thumb holes into a pair of spectacles, and squint and wink at you maliciously. A word in your ear, then in a whisper, those snuffers are haunted. Their insignificant iron frame is the habitation of a demon, an imp of darkness, and I've been troubled till I've got snuffers on the brain, and I shall have them till I'm snuffed out. It has been going on now for a couple of years, ever since my landlady sent the snuffers up to me first in my shiny crockery ware candlestick, where those snuffers glide about like a snake in a tin pail. I remember the first night as well as can be. It was in November, a weird, wet, foggy night, when the river side streets were wrapped in a yellow blanket of fog, and I was going to bed, when, at my first touch of the candlestick, those snuffers glided off with an angry snap, and lay open-mouthed glaring at me from the floor. I was somewhat startled, certainly, but far from alarmed, and I seized the fugitives and placed them in the candlestick, opened the door, and ascended the stairs. Mind, I am only recording facts untinged by the pen of romance. Before I had ascended 4 steps, those hideous snuffers darted off, and plunged, point downwards, on my left slippered foot, causing me an agonizing pain, and the next moment a bead of starting blood stained my stocking. I will not declare this, but I believe it to be a fact, as I said something oathish. I am nearly certain that I heard a low, fiendish chuckle, and when I stooped to lift the snuffers, there was a bright spark in the open mouth, and a pungent blue smoke breathed out to annoy my nostrils. I was too bold in those days to take much notice of the incident, and I hurried upstairs, not, however, without seeing that there was a foul black patch left upon my holland stair cloth, and then I hurried into bed, and tried to sleep. But I could not, try as I would. In the darkness I could just make out the candlestick against the blind, and from that point incessantly the demon snuffers gradually approached me, till they sat spectacle-wise astride my nose, and a pair of burning eyes glazed through them right into mine. Need I say that I arose next morning feverish and unrefreshed to go about my daily duties? "I'll have no more of it tonight," I said to myself as I rose early to go to bed and make up for the past bad night, and I smiled sardonically as I took up the highly glazed candlestick and tried to shake the black, straddling reptile out upon the sideboard. I said tried, for, to my horror, the great eyeholes leered at me as they hugged round the upright portion of the stick, and refused to be dislodged. I shook them again, and one part went round the extinguisher support, while the reptile dislodged, so that the extinguisher rattled upon the sideboard top, but the snuffers were there still. I tried again, and they, or it, dodged round and thrust a head through the handle, where they stuck fast, grinning at me till I set the candlestick down and stared. "Pooh! Stuff! Ridiculous!" I exclaimed, quite angry at my weak imaginative folly, and determined to act like a man. I seized the candlestick with one hand, the snuffers with the other, and after a hard fight succeeded in wriggling them out of their stronghold, banged them down upon the tablecloth, seized them again, snuffed my candle viciously before replacing them on the table, and then marched out of the room, proud of my moral triumph, and rejoicing in having freed myself of the demon. But, as I stood upon the stairs, I could see that my hand was blackened, and the icy galvanic feeling that assailed my nerves when I first touched the snuffers still tingled right to my elbow. But I was free of my enemy, and marching with freely playing lungs into my bedroom, I closed and locked the door, sat down my empty candlestick, changed my coat and vest for a dressing gown, and began to brush my hair. It is my custom to brush my hair with a pair of brushes for 10 minutes every night before retiring to rest. I find it strengthening to the brain. Upon this occasion I had brushed hard for 5 minutes, when there was a loud knock at my bedroom door. "Can I speak to you a moment, sir?" said the voice of my landlady. I rose and opened the door, and then started back in disgust, as I was greeted with, "Please, sir, you forgot your snuffers." My snuffers! It was too horrible, but there was more to bear. "And please, sir, I do hope you'll be more careful. It's a mussy we weren't all burnt to death in our beds, for the snuffers have made a great hole as big as your hand in the tablecloth, and scorched the mahogany table, and it was a mussy I went into your room before I went up to bed." I couldn't speak, for I was drawn irresistibly on to obey, as my landlady held the snuffer's handle towards me, and pointed to the fungus snuff upon the common candle. I thrust in a finger and thumb, closed the door in desperation, for I could not refuse the snuffers, once more locked myself in, and stalked to the dressing table, and as I heard my landlady's retreating steps, I snuffed the candle, which started up instantly with a brighter flame as the snuffer's mouth closed upon the incandescent wick. "I'm slightly nervous," I said to myself, as I essayed to put down my enemies. "I want tone, iron, iodine, tonic bitters, and curse the thing!" I ejaculated, shaking my hand and trying to dislodge the snuffers. My efforts were but vain, for the rings clung tightly to my finger and thumb, cut into my flesh, and it was not until I had given them a frantic wrench, which broke the rivet and separated the halves, that I was able to tear out my bruised digits, and stand, panting, at the broken instrument. There was relief, though, here. I felt as if I had crushed out the reptile's life, and the two pieces, their living identity gone, lay nevertheless, and devoid of terror, in the candle tray. I slept excellently that night, and smiled as I dressed beside the broken fragments. I had achieved a victory over self, as well as over an enemy. I enjoyed my breakfast, after raising the white cloth to look at the damage, which I knew would appear as 20 shillings in the weekly bill, but I did not care, though I shuddered slightly as I thought of the snuffer's horrible designs. I dined that day with friends, played a few games afterwards at pool, and then we had oysters. I was in the best spirits as I opened the door with my latchkey, and I laughed heartily at what I called my folly of the previous nights. But as I entered my room, there was the great black hole in the green cloth table cover, and the charred wood beneath, while upon the sideboard I groaned as I stood half transfixed. I could have imagined that I had on divers leaden soled boots, for there, maliciously grinning at me with half open mouth, were the demon snuffers, joined together by a new, glistening rivet, which only added to the weird appearance, as the beak cocked itself at me, and the great eyes glared, as the black mouth seemed to say, "You'll never get rid of me." Something seemed to draw me, and I went and took the candlestick, my eyes being fixed the while upon the snuffers, and I came in contact with several pieces of furniture as I went into the passage, where I held the candlestick very much on one side as I lit the candle at the little lamp. I hoped that the snuffers would fall out, but they grinned maliciously and did not stir. The next moment I was obliged to use them, for the candle began to gutter, when, as nothing followed, I grew bolder, and began to ascend the stairs. In a minute, though, before I was halfway up the second flight, as though the candlestick was carried perfectly straight, crash! The demon snuffers darted out and dashed themselves upon the floor. I did not stay to look, but hurried to my bedroom, closing and locking the door. Safe this time, I thought, for it was late, and I knew that my landlady must have been long in bed. Then I began to think of how they had hopped out of the candlestick, and remembered what they had done on the previous night, how they had tried to set fire to the house. Suppose they should do so now? The cold perspiration trickled down my nose at the very thought. I dared not leave the demon, or twin demons, the horrid Siamese pair. I would though I was safe here, but fire! Suppose they set the house on fire! Down I went in the dark, very softly too, lest I should alarm the landlady and the other lodgers. But though the odour was strong, I went right to the bottom, and stood upon the door mat without finding my enemies. I stood and thought for a few minutes, and then began slowly to ascend, feeling carefully all over every step as I went up to my bedroom, where I arrived, without ever my hand coming in contact with that which I sought. "I'll go to bed and leave them," I ejaculated, and I turned upon my heel, but, at that moment, the pungent burning odour came up stronger than ever, and I was compelled to descend, to find that the demon twins had been lying in ambush halfway down, so that I trod upon them, tripped. In my terror my foot glided over them, and I fell with a crash into the umbrella stand, which I upset with a hideous noise upon the oilcloth. Not so loud, though, but that I could hear the little black imps take 3 or 4 grasshopper leaps along the passage, ending by sticking the pointed beak into the street door. Before I could gather myself up, I heard doors opening upstairs, and screaming from the girls below, who slept in the kitchen, and the next minute old Major O'Brien's voice came roaring down, "And if ye shtir a step, I'll blow out your brains." Of course I had to explain, and I had the horrible knowledge that they gave me the credit of being intoxicated, the Major saying he would not stop in a house where people were prowling about at all hours, ending by himself, at the landlady's request, examining the door to see if it was latched securely, and then seeing me safely to my room. "And if I did me duty, sor, I should lock you in," he said by way of good night. "And now get into bed, sor, and at once, and here are your snuffers." I could fill volumes with the tortures inflicted upon me by those haunted snuffers, for they clung to me, in spite of every effort, never left me free. It was in vain that I came home early and shifted them into the Major's candlestick, they only came back. I threw them out of the bedroom window once, and they were found by the maid in the area. I threw them out again, and they were picked up by the policeman, and they made him bring them back. Then I tried at midday, but an old woman brought them in, and made a row because they went through her parasol, so that I had to pay 10 shillings, besides being looked upon by my landlady as a lunatic. I thrust them into the fire one night, and held them there with the tongs, lest they should leap out, but they would not burn, and my landlady, finding them in the ashes, had them japanned, and they were in their old place next day. I had no better luck when I thrust them, buried them, deep in a scuttle of ashes. They only turned up out of the dust hole when Mary sifted the cinders. They always came off black on to my hands when they did not anoint my fingers with soft tallow. If they fell out of the candlestick, it was always on to oilcloth or paint, where they could make a noise, jumping about like a grasshopper, till they ended up by standing upon the sharp beak, with the spectacle like holes in the air. If I went up to dress, they would shoot into my collar box, or amongst my clean shirts, smutting them all over. If I tried to kill a wasp with them upon an autumn evening, when the insect crept out of a plum at dessert, the wretches only snipped him in two. If rejoicing at the inflicted torture, in short, they have worn me out, those snuffers, and, if it was not from fear, I should take and drop them from the parapet of a bridge. But there, it would be in vain. They would be certain to turn up, and they are not mortal, so what can you expect? Let this communication be a secret, for it is written wholly by day, when the snuffers lie in the lower regions. A bright thought has occurred to me. The Major leaves this morning for Berlin. I have done it. His carpet bag stood in the hall, waiting for the cab. The Major was in the drawing room paying his bill. The maids were upstairs making the beds. I stole down, like a thief, into the kitchen. The snuffers were in my dirty candlestick upon the dresser. I seized the grinning, tallow anointed demons, flew up the stairs, and as I heard the drawing room door open, tore the bag a little apart and thrust them in. The next minute they were on the roof of a cab, and on their way to Berlin, where they will haunt the Major. A month of uninterrupted joy has passed. On the day of the Major's departure I seemed to wed pleasure, and this has been the honeymoon. This morning, when I paid my bill, the landlady announced the coming back of the Major to his old apartments. I have been in dread ever since, but this is folly. I will be hopeful. My worst fears may not be confirmed. It's all over. He has brought them back. They grin at me as I write. End of section 21. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Section 22 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Olsen-Vitak, Los Angeles. Humorous Readings and Recitations, edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 22. The Walrus and the Carpenter, by Lewis Carroll. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd, because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily, because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. "It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun." The sea was wet as wet could be. The suns were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead. there were no birds to fly. The walrus and the carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If this were only cleared away, they said, it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, the walrus said, that they could get it clear? I doubt it, said the carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "Oh, oysters, come and walk with us," the walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk, along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4, to give a hand to each." The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat. And this was odd, because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4. And thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The walrus and the carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath, and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the carpenter. They thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the walrus said. "Do you admire the view?" "It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The carpenter said nothing, but cut us another slice. "I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the walrus said, "to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The carpenter said nothing, but "The butter's spread too thick." "I weep for you," the walrus said. "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. "Oh, oysters," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none, and this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one. End of section 22.
Section 23 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Penn. Humorous Readings and Recitations. Edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 23. My Brother Henry by J. M. Barrie. At first sight it may not, perhaps, seem quite the thing that I should be hilarious because I have at last had the courage to kill my brother Henry. For some time, however, Henry had been annoying me. Strictly speaking, I never had a brother Henry. It is just 15 months since I began to acknowledge that there was such a person. It came about in this way. I have a friend of the name of Fenton who, like myself, lives in London. His house is so conveniently situated that I can go there and back in one day. About a year and a half ago I was at Fenton's, and he remarked that he had met a man the day before who knew my brother Henry. Not having a brother Henry, I felt that there must be a mistake somewhere, so I suggested that Fenton's friend had gone wrong in the name. My only brother, I pointed out with the suavity of manner that makes me a general favorite, was called Alexander. Yes, said Fenton, but he spoke of Alexander also. Even this did not convince me that I had a brother Henry, and I asked Fenton the name of his friend. Scudamore was the name, and the gentleman had met my brothers Alexander and Henry some 6 years previously in Paris. When I heard this, I probably frowned, for then I knew who my brother Henry was. Strange though it may seem, I was my own brother Henry. I distinctly remember meeting this man Scudamore at Paris during the time that Alexander and I were there for a week's pleasure and quarreled every day. I explained this to Fenton, and there, for the time being, the matter rested. I had, however, by no means heard the last of Henry. Several times afterwards I heard from various persons that Scudamore wanted to meet me because he knew my brother Henry. At last we did meet, at a Bohemian supper party in Furnival's Inn, and almost as soon as he saw me, Scudamore asked where Henry was now. This was precisely what I feared. I am a man who always looks like a boy. There are a few persons of my age in London who retain their boyish appearance as long as I have done. Indeed, this is a curse of my life. Though I am approaching the age of 30, I pass for 20, and I have observed old gentlemen frown at my precocity when I said a good thing or helped myself to a second glass of wine. There was, therefore, nothing surprising in Scudamore's remark that, when he had the pleasure of meeting Henry must have been about the age that I had now reached. All would have been well had I explained the real state of affairs to this annoying man, but, unfortunately for myself, I loathe entering upon explanations to anybody about anything. When I ring for my boots and my servant thinks I want a glass of water, I drink the water and remain indoors. Much, then, did I dread a discussion with Scudamore, his surprise when he heard that I was Henry (my Christian name is Thomas), and his comments on my youthful appearance. Besides, I was at that moment carving a tough fowl, and as I learned to carve from a handbook, I can make no progress unless I keep muttering to myself, "Cut from A to B, taking care to pass along the line CD, and sever the wing K from the body at the point F." There was no likelihood of my meeting Scudamore again, so the easiest way to get rid of him seemed to be to humor him. I therefore told him that Henry was in India, married and doing well. "Remember me to Henry when you write to him," was Scudamore's last remark to me that evening. A few weeks later someone tapped me on the shoulder in Oxford Street. It was Scudamore. "Heard from Henry?" he asked. I said I had heard by the last mail. "Anything particular in the letter?" I felt it would not do to say there was nothing particular in a letter which had come all the way from India, so I hinted that Henry had had trouble with his wife. By this I meant that her health was bad, but he took it up in another way, and I did not set him right. "Uh-huh," he said, shaking his head sagaciously. "I'm sorry to hear that. Poor Henry." "Poor old boy," was all I could think of replying. "How about the children?" Scudamore asked. "Oh, the children," I said with what I thought presence of mind, "are coming to England." "To stay with Alexander?" he asked, for Alexander is a married man. My answer was that Alexander was expecting them by the middle of next month, and eventually Scudamore went away, muttering, "Poor Henry." In a month or so we met again. "No word of Henry's getting leave of absence?" asked Scudamore. I replied shortly that Henry had gone to live in Bombay and would not be home for years. He saw that I was brusque, so what does he do but draw me aside for a quiet explanation. "I suppose," he said, "you are annoyed because I told Fenton that Henry's wife had run away from him. The fact is, I did it for your own good. You see, I happened to make a remark to Fenton about your brother Henry, and he said there was no such person. Of course I laughed at that, and pointed out not only that I had the pleasure of Henry's acquaintance, but that you and I had a talk about the old fellow every time we met. 'Well,' Fenton said, 'this is a most remarkable thing, for Tom, meaning you, said to me in this very room, sitting in that very chair, that Alexander was his only brother. I saw that Fenton resented your concealing the existence of your brother Henry from him, so I thought that the most friendly thing I could do was to tell him that your reticence was doubtless due to the fact that Henry's private affairs were troubling you. Naturally, in the circumstances, you did not want to talk about Henry. I shook Scudamore by the hand, telling him that he had acted judiciously, but if I could have stabbed him quietly at that moment, I dare say I should have done it. I did not see Scudamore again for a long time, for I took care to keep out of his way, but I heard first from him and then of him. One day he wrote to me saying that his nephew was going to Bombay, and would I be so good as to give the youth an introduction to my brother Henry. He also asked me to dine with him and his nephew. I declined the dinner, but I sent the nephew the required note of introduction to Henry. The next I heard of Scudamore was from Fenton. "By the way," said Fenton, "Scudamore is in Edinburgh at present." I trembled, for Edinburgh is where Alexander lives. "What has taken him there?" I asked, with assumed carelessness. Fenton believed it was business. "But," he added, "Scudamore asked me to tell you that he meant to call on Alexander, as he was anxious to see Henry's children." A few days afterwards I had a telegram from Alexander, who generally uses this means of communication when he corresponds with me. "Do you know a man Scudamore? Reply," was what Alexander said. I thought of answering that we had met a man of that name when we were in Paris, but, on the whole, replied boldly, "No, no one of the name of Scudamore." About 2 months ago I passed Scudamore in Regent Street, and he did not recognize me. This I could have borne if there had been no more of Henry, but I knew that Scudamore was now telling everybody about Henry's wife. By and by I got a letter from an old friend of Alexander's asking me if there was any truth in a report that Alexander was going to Bombay. Soon afterwards Alexander wrote to me to say that he had been told by several persons that I was going to Bombay. In short, I saw that the time had come for killing Henry. So I told Fenton that Henry had died of fever, deeply regretted, and asked him to be sure to tell Scudamore, who had always been interested in the deceased's welfare. The other day Fenton told me that he had communicated the sad intelligence to Scudamore. "How did he take it?" I asked. "Well," Fenton said reluctantly, "he told me that when he was up in Edinburgh he did not get on well with Alexander, but he expressed great curiosity as to Henry's children." "Ah," I said, "the children were both drowned in the Forth. A sad affair. We can't bear to talk of it. I'm not likely to see much of Scudamore again, nor is Alexander. Scudamore now goes about saying that Henry was the only one of us he really liked." End of section 23. Section 24 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Penn. Humorous Readings and Recitations, edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 24. A Night with a Stork, by W. E. Wilcox. 4 individuals, namely, my wife, my infant son, my maid of all work, and myself, occupy one of a row of very small houses in the suburbs of London. I am a thoroughly domestic man, and notwithstanding that my occupation necessitates absence from my mansion between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., my heart is generally at home with my diminutive household. My wife and I love regularity and quiet above all things, and although, since the arrival of my son and heir, we had not enjoyed that peace which we did during the first year of our married life, yet his juvenile, though somewhat powerful, little lungs had as yet failed in making ours a noisy house. Our regularity had, moreover, remained undisturbed, and we got up, went to bed, dined, breakfasted, and took tea at the same time day after day. We had been going on in this clockwork fashion for a year and a half, when one morning the postman brought to our door a letter of ominous appearance, and on looking at the direction I found that it came from an old, rich, and very eccentric uncle of mine, with whom, for certain reasons, we wished to remain on the best of terms. "What can Uncle Martin have to write about?" was our simultaneous exclamation, and I opened it with considerable curiosity. Martin House, Hertfordshire, October 17th, 18 something. Dear Nephew, you may perhaps have heard that I am forming an aviary here. A friend in Rotterdam has written to me to say that he has sent by the boat, which will arrive in London tomorrow afternoon, a very intelligent parrot and a fine stork. As the vessel arrives too late for them to be sent on the same night, I shall be obliged by your taking the birds home and forwarding them to me the next morning. With my respects to your good lady, I remain your affectionate uncle, Ralph Martin. I said nothing, but got a book on natural history and turned to stork. With trembling fingers I passed over the fact of his hind toe being short, the middle too long, and joined to the outer one by a large membrane, and by a smaller one to the inner toe, because that would not matter much for one night. But I groaned out to my wife the pleasant intelligence that his height is 4 feet, his appetite extremely voracious, and his food frogs, mice, worms, snails, and eels. Where were we to provide a supper and breakfast of this description for him? I went to my office and passed anything but a pleasant day, my thoughts constantly reverting to our expected visitors. At 4 o'clock I took a cab to the docks, and on arriving there inquired for the ship, which was pointed out to me as the one with the crowd upon the quay. On driving up I discovered why there was a crowd, and the discovery did not bring comfort with it. On the deck, on one leg, stood the stork. Whether it was the sea voyage, or the leaving his home, or being a stork of high moral principle, he was grieving at the continual and rather joyous and exulting swearing of the parrot. I do not know, but I never saw a more melancholy looking object in my life. I went down on the deck, and did not like the expression of relief that came over the captain's face when he found what I had come for. The transmission of the parrot from the ship to the cab was an easy matter, as he was in a cage, but the stork was merely tethered by one leg, and although he did his best, when brought to the foot of the ladder, in trying to get up he failed utterly, and had to be half shoved, half hauled, all the way, which, as he got astride after the manner of equestrians on every other bar, was a work of some difficulty. I hurried him into the cab, and ordering the man to drive as quickly as possible, got in with my guests. At first I had to keep dodging my head about, to keep my face away from his bill as he turned round, but all of a sudden he broke the little window at the back of the cab, thrust his head through, and would keep it there, notwithstanding I kept pulling him back. Consequently, when we drew up at my door, there was a mob of about 1,000 strong around us. I got him in as well as I could and shut the door. How can I describe the spending of that evening? How can I get sufficient power out of the English language to let you know what a nuisance that bird was to us? How can I tell you the cool manner in which he inspected our domestic arrangements, walking slowly into rooms and standing on one leg until his curiosity was satisfied, the expression of wretchedness that he threw over his entire person when he was tethered to the banisters, and had found out that, owing to our limited accommodation, he was to remain in the hall all night, the way in which he ate the snails specially provided for him, verifying to the letter the naturalist's description of his appetite. How can you, who have not had a stork staying with you, have any idea of the change which came over his temper after his supper? How he pecked at everybody who came near him, how he stood sentinel at the foot of the stairs, how my wife and I made fruitless attempts to get past, followed by ignominious retreats, how at last we outmaneuvered him by throwing a tablecloth over his head, and then rushing by him, gaining the top of the stairs before he could disentangle himself. Added to this, we had to endure language from that parrot which would have disgraced a pothouse. Indeed, so scurrilous did he become that we had to take him and lock him up in the coal hole, where, from fatigue or the darkness of his bedroom, he soon swore himself to sleep. We were quite ready for rest, and the forgetfulness which we hoped sleep, that balm of hurt minds, would bring with it, but our peace was not to last long. About 2 a.m. I was awakened by my wife and told to listen. I did so, and heard a sort of scrambling noise outside the door. What can that be? Thought I. He has broken his string and is coming upstairs, said my wife. And then remembering that the nursery door was generally left open, she urged my immediate stopping his further progress. But, my dear, said I, what am I to do in my present defenseless state of clothing, if he should take to pecking? My wife's expression of the idea of my considering myself before the baby determined me at once, come what might, to go and do him battle. Out I went, and sure enough there he was on the landing, resting himself, after his unusual exertion, by tucking one leg up. He looked so subdued that I was about to take him by the string and lead him downstairs, when he drew back his head, and in less time than it takes to relate, I was back in my room, bleeding profusely from a very severe wound in my leg. I shouted out to the nurse to shut the door, and determined to let the infamous bird go where he liked. I bound up my leg and went to bed again, but the thought that there was a stork wandering about the house prevented me from getting any more sleep. From certain sounds that we heard, we had little doubt but that he was passing some of his time in the cupboard where we kept our spare crockery, and an inspection the next day confirmed this. In the morning I ventured cautiously out, and, finding he was in our spare bedroom, I shut the door upon him. I then went for a large sack, and with the help of the tablecloth and the boy who cleans our shoes, we got him into it without any personal damage. I took him off in this way to the station, and sent him and the parrot off to my uncle by the first train. We have determined that, taking our chance about a place in my uncle's will or not, we will never again have anything to do with any foreign animals, however much he may ask and desire it. End of section 24.
Section 25 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Humorous Readings and Recitations. Edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 25. The Faithful Lovers. By F. C. Burnand. I'd been away from her 3 years, about that, and I returned to find my Mary true, and though I'd questioned her, I did not doubt that it was unnecessary to do. 'Twas by the chimney corner we were sitting. Mary, said I, have you been always true? Frankly, says she, just pausing in her knitting, I don't think I've unfaithful been to you. But for the 3 years past I'll tell you what I've done, then say if I've been true or not. When first you left, my grief was uncontrollable. Alone I mourned my miserable lot, and all who saw me thought me inconsolable, till Captain Clifford came from Aldershot. To flirt with him amused me while 'twas new. I don't count that unfaithfulness, do you? The next, oh, let me see, was Frankie Phillips. I met him at my uncle's Christmas tide, and 'neath the mistletoe, where lips met lips, he gave me his first kiss, and here she sighed. We stayed 6 weeks at uncle's. How time flew! I don't count that unfaithfulness, do you? Lord Cecil Fossmote, only 21, lent me his horse. Oh, how we rode and raced! We scoured the downs, we rode to hounds, such fun! And often was his arm around my waist. That was to lift me up or down. But who would count that as unfaithfulness, do you? Do you know Reggie Vere? Ah, how he sings! We met, 'twas at a picnic. Ah, such weather! He gave me, look, the first of these 2 rings, when we were lost in Clifton Woods together. Ah, what a happy time we spent, we two! I don't count that unfaithfulness to you. I've yet another ring from him. Do you see? The plain gold circlet that is shining here. I took her hand, "O Mary, can it be That you," quoth she, "that I am Mrs. Vere?" "I don't count that unfaithfulness, do you?" "No," I replied, "for I am married too." Section 26 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Humorous Readings and Recitations. Edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 26. The Wail of a Banner Bearer. By Arthur Matheson. Well, what if I am only a banner bearer? There's bigger blokes than me what begun as supes, and see where they got to. Why don't I get there? 'Cause I ain't never had the chance. You just let me get a speaking part, as suits me, that's all. Oh, it wouldn't be all, eh? Why, but there, you're a baby in the profession. You are, when you've been capting on the guard, and third noble, and a bandit kerosin, and first hancient bard, and fourth in the council of 10 what listens to Otheller, and the mob in the Capitol, and a Harcher of Merry England, and a peer of France, what don't speak, but has to look as if he could say a lot. When you've been all this you may talk. I needn't be offended. All right, old pal, I ain't, though I was 'urt when the utility cove said I was only a banner bearer. Only! Why I should like to know where they'd be without us, all them old spoutin' tragedy merchants. They'd have no armies, consequently they couldn't rave at 'em, and lead 'em on to victory and things. They wouldn't 'ave no senates, so they'd have to cut out their potent, grave, and reverent seniors, and that 'ud worry 'em. They wouldn't 'ave no hexated citizens, and so they couldn't bury old Caesar nor praise him neither. They couldn't strew no fields with no dead soldiers. They'd 'ave nobody to chivy him when they come to the throne, or returned from the wars. They couldn't 'ave no percussions. As for balls, and parties, and tournemongs, why, they couldn't give 'em. And where 'ud they often be without the distant 'ollerings behind the scenes, allus a coming nearer and louder? Why, I remember an 'eavy lead one night, as had insulted his army fearful at rehearsal. He stops sudden, and thumps his breastplate, and says, 'Ark, that tumult!' when there warn't no more tumult than two flies 'ud make in a milk jug. We just cut off his tumult, and queered his pitch in a minute, for the laugh come in 'ot. We're just as much wanted as they are, make no error. Only a banner bearer! Only be blowed! Oh, don't you bother, I ain't getting waxy. I'm only a standing up for my profession. What do you say? They could do without me in the modern drarmer. The modern drarmer, my boy, ain't actin'. It's nothin' but cuff shootin'. You just has to stand against a mankel shelf, with your hands in Poole's pockets, and say nothing elegantly. You don't want no chest notes. You don't want no action. You don't want no excitement. You don't want no lungs, no heart, and no brain. Only lungs and soda, heart and potash, brain and seltzer. Everything's diluted, my boy, for the modern drummer, and the old school, and the old costumes 'ud bust the sides and roof too of the swell band boxes, where they does the new school and the new costumes. P'raps I'm right. Of course I'm right, and I'm in earnest, too. Why, my boy, if they was to offer me an engagement as a guest in one of them cuff shootin' plays, and ask me to go on in evening dress, I'm blessed if I wouldn't throw up the part. Trousers and white ties cramps me. I want a suit o' mail and abdurd a tunic, and my legs free, a dagger in my teeth, not a toothpick, a battle axe in my 'and, not a crutch. I likes to be led to victory, I does. I likes to storm castles, and trample on the foe, I does. I likes to hang our banners on the outward walls, I does. I'm a born banner bearer, I am, and I glories in it. No, my boy, none of your milk and water guests and such for the likes of me, and if I was the Lord Chamberlain, I'd prohibit the modern drama altogether. Them's my sentiments. If he doesn't perhibit it, acting 'ull soon be moderned out of existence, and we shall 'ave Macbeth in a 2-guinea tourist suit, and Louis the 11th in knickerbockers, on a biskel. It's the old banner bearing school as got us all big actors, and it stands to reason, my boy, for a cove can't spread itself in a frock coat and drawing room langwidge. They're both on 'em too tame for what I calls real actin'. What, you have heard say as us banner bearers don't act, was only machines? Well, some on us don't, perhaps, but some on us does, and no mistake. You can't as a rule expect much feeling, much dignity, much patriotism, or much sympathy for a shillin' a night. If they was all the real articles they'd fetch a lot more than that. But there is gentlemen in my line as goes in for all four. Reg'lar comes natural to him. Why, I've been that worked on when I've seen Joan o' Hark going in a perisher at the stake, and makin' that last dyin' speech and confession of hers, that I felt a real 'art beat against my property breastplate, and felt real tears tricklin' down to my false beard, and I've been so struck with admiration for some Othellos, that when they've been a dressin' of me as the Senate, I felt as dignified as I've been the Doge of Venice himself, and I bet he looked it. As for patriotism, there isn't a man living as he died for his country, willing, mind you, as often as I have, and I've strewed many a bloody field of battle with Ernst's corpse, I have, and as far as regards sympathy, it is stood in my way, for I've been that upset by Queen Catherine's and Prince Arthur's, and even old Shylock, for Gratiano does give 'em a doin', and Ophelia's, and other sufferin' parties, as I've often forgot my exits and been fined a tanner, and if that ain't actin', I should like to know what is. It's all very well for them newspaper crickets to harry us, and say we're a set o' this and a set o' the other, and that we ain't got no hiddiss. They wouldn't 'ave many hiddiss if they wasn't paid more than a shilling a night, with often 2d. off the agent, for the use of 'em. The article's as good as the price, and no mistake. Some of us gets a bit more, and accordin' some of us gives a bit more, for there's first heavy lead, and setterer among the soups, just as there is among the principals. Don't make no error. Have to do as the stars tell us. Well, of course we does. Only if the stars don't treat us like gents, we know how to queer their pitches, rather. What it ain't so very long since I was a playing a Roman lictor in Virginius, and when we was a rehearsin' of it, I'm as played Happius Clordyus called me a pig. All right, says I, aside, like I'll pig ya. According when night comes and he makes an exit in the third act and says, didn't he enjoy himself with it? And I shall surely see that he reserve it. He chucks his Roger over his right shoulder and turns round as majestic as a beetle to walk off. Well, somehow, just then I drops my bundle of sticks, fusses, they call 'em, all accidental like, and Happius Clordyus, with his A's in the air, comes to grief, slap over 'em. He was the unhappiest Clordyus all through that play as ever you see. What did he call me a pig for, the idiot? Seemed to be important after all. Important! I should think there we was. There couldn't be no big drammers without us, no gallant warriors, no 'owling mobs, no down with the tyrants, no brigand reposing, no 'appy peasants, no stage pictures of any account, if it warn't for the soups and banner bearers, as ought to be made more on and seen to a bit better than they is. For what says the old Shyley in the play, in what old Phillips us warned 'em up in? What, says he? What, hath not a soup eyes, ands, horgans, something else, and passions, fed with the same food? No, Sharkey, old man, he ain't. Well, if you prick us, don't us bleed? If we larf, don't you tickle us? If you wrong us, ain't we going to take it out of you, like I took it out of Happius Clordyus? How I do wag! Well, it ain't enough to make me. Don't let that 'ere utility cuff shooter allowed to me as only a banner bearer, then, let 'im, and all the others treat us more respectful, and he and them too 'ull find a feeling art and good manners too, at even a shilling a night, though we could throw 'em in a lot more of both for an extra bob. Good night, old man. Permission by Messrs. Routledge and Sons. End of section 26. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Section 27 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Humorous Readings and Recitations. Edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 27. The Dream of the Bilious Beetle. By Arthur Shirley. 'Twas in the grimy winter time, an evening cold and damp, and 24 work-us boys, all of one ill-fed stamp, were blowing on blue finger tips, bent double with the cramp, and when the skilly poured out fell into each urchin's pan, they swallowed it at such a pace as only boyhood can. But the beetle sat remote from all, a bilious looking man. His hat was off, red vest apart, to catch the evening breeze. He thought that might cool his brow, it only made him sneeze, so pressed his side with his hand, and tried to seem as if at ease. Heave after heave his waistcoat gave, to him was peace denied. It tortured him to see them eat, he couldn't though he tried. Good fare had made him much too fat, and rather goggle eyed. At length he started to his feet, some hurried steps he took, now up the ward, now down the ward, with wild dyspeptic look. And lo! he saw a workus boy, who read a penny book. "You beastly brat, what is you're at? I warrant 'tis no good. What's this? The life of Turpin bold, or death of Robin Hood? It's hesses on the crumpet, sir, as a harticle of food." He started from that boy as though in's ear he'd blown a trumpet, his hand he pressed upon his chest, then with his fist did thump it, and down he sat beside the brat and talked of the crumpet. How now and then that muffin man, whom tradition tells, by pastry trade fortunes had made, and come out awful swells, while their old patrons suffered worse than Irving in the Bells. And well I know, said he, forsooth for plenty have I bought the sufferings of foolish folk who eat more than they ought. With pepsin pills and liver pads is their consumption fraught. Oh, oh, my boy, my pauper boy, take my advice, 'tis best shun All such tempting tasty things, though nice beyond all question, Unless you wish like me to feel the pangs of indigestion. One, who had ever made me long, a muffin man and old, I watched into a public house, he called for whiskey cold, And for one moment left his stock within green baize enrolled. I crept up to them, thinking what an appetite I'd got. I gloated o'er them lying there elastic and all hot. I thought of butter laid on thick, and then I prigged the lot. I took them home, I toasted them, p'raps upward of a score, And never had so fine a feast on luscious fare before. And now, I said, I'll go to bed, and dream of eating more. All night I lay uneasily, and rolled from side to side, At first without one wink of sleep, no matter how I tried. And then I dreamt I was a 'bus, and gurgled full inside. I was a 'bus by nightmares drawn on to some giddy crest, Now launched like lightning through the air, now stopped and now compressed. I felt a million muffin men were seated on my chest. I heard their bells, their horrid bells, in sound as loud as trumpets. O curses on ye, spongy tribe, ye cruffins and ye mumpets! I must be mad, I mean to say, ye muffins and ye crumpets. Then came a chill like Wenham ice, then hot as hottest steam. I could not move a single limb, I could not even scream. You pauper brat, remember that all this was but a dream. The boy gazed on his troubled brow, from which big drops were oozing, And for the moment all respect for his dread function losing, Made this remark, well blow me tight, our beadle's been a boozing. That very week, before the beak, they brought that beadle Burleigh. He pleaded guilty, in a tone dyspeptically surly, and he lives still at Pentonville, with hair not long or curly. End of section 27. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Section 28 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Humorous Readings and Recitations. Edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 28. My Friend Treacle by Watkin Elliot. So Charlie is going to marry the most charming girl in the world! I ejaculated, after a hearty laugh over the following epistle from my old friend. Dear Bob, I am going to do for myself in earnest. No humbug this time, for better or for worse, and if it turns out the latter, it will be a scrape no one can get me out of. Of course, you understand I am about to marry, and I need not add she is the most charming girl in the world, fair, sky blue eyes, silkworm, I mean spun silk hair, lovely in fact. Come and be my best man. Do, old fellow. You have backed me up lots of times before, and although we have lost sight of one another since we were boys together, that goes for nothing between us, does it? Write by return, and say you will support me. I have a dread that I shall marry the wrong girl, or allow someone else to marry Lucy that's her name, or do something unlucky, unless you look after me. Yours as ever, Charlie Boston. P.S. It comes off in a fortnight. It. Well, that is vague enough, but I suppose he means the happy event. Ye gods and little fishes, to call a marriage it! But that is like Boston. And sure to do something unlucky, are you? Well, I guess you are not the treacle of old, unless you get into some quandary over it, I muttered. And then I threw myself back in my chair and laughed again as some of our adventures, when we were at Dr. Omega's school, I mean college, presented themselves to my mind. Glorious times those, looking back upon them now, although we did not value them, in our careless youth, at their full worth. Treacle's, i.e. Boston's, daring always led him to some adventure, and I always backed him up, in a feeble way perhaps, and we always got found out somehow, and got our deserts in a manner more satisfactory to lovers of justice than ourselves. Stunning times! The very fact of our being punished for the same crime, and at the same time, was a bond of union between Treacle and myself. One touch of sympathy, or one touch of the rod, made us kin in a manner very peculiar. A fellow feeling made us wondrous kind and sympathetic. You talk of little dinners and little suppers in these days, and seem them Epicurean feasts. But be really hungry, hungry as a schoolboy, and enjoy a little supper off kippered herring on the sly. That is a feast, if you like. Such feasts as these we enjoyed at Mother Kemp's, down the village, when the doctor, tutors, and monitors imagined us safely tucked in our little beds. Looking upon Mother Kemp, in those days, I thought her a good fairy disguised as a witch. Looking back upon her, with manhood's enlightened judgment, I think she was an unprincipled old woman, who traded on our weaknesses. I confess myself to have been a hungry boy. Boston, with a penitence which did him credit, used to confess the same. We both had a propensity to come through our trouser legs and sleeve jackets, and what was worse, could not help ourselves doing so. Boston was of an ingenious turn of mind, and it was he who suggested that those boys, who could afford to be hungry with any satisfaction to themselves, should club together for a supper at Mother Kemp's once a week, and it was through one of those suppers, or the search for one, that he got his sweet sobriquet of treacle. He having made the suggestion, we elected him chief of our expeditions, and thus to a certain extent he held the fate of our appetites in his hands. One night we had escaped, as usual, by means of a rope ladder made by Boston, from the window of the room of which I was senior boy, to Mother Kemp's in the village. Mother Kemp kept a general shop. That is to say, she retailed tallow, treacle, rope, bacon, herrings, soap, cotton, tops, balls, butter, sweets, and so forth, and she not only, as a rule, sold us a supper out of her heterogeneous store, but cooked it, if needs were, and served it for us in her back parlor, that is, if we could pay ready cash down. This night of which I speak we could not. We had appealed to Madam Kemp's motherly heart for trust in vain, and we were returning home in a state of double the hunger to that in which we had started, on account of our hopes being unfulfilled, when Charlie Boston made a remark in a melancholy tone. It was, "I wonder if the pantry window is open." We eyed him askance and in silence, and if, with a frown of determination on his brow, there is anything inside, then we knew we were in for something, be it to eat or feel, and followed him half in hope, half in fear. The window was open. Looking upon that casement from my point of view now, I decided it was an architectural folly, being no more than 7 feet from the ground, and innocent of bars or protection of any kind, and moreover large enough for any one of moderate size to creep through. From our point of view, then, we thought it a very jolly contrivance. "Hurrah!" shouted Boston, sotto voce. In fact, very much sotto voce. "We will indeed sup at the doctor's expense to night. Bless him! Eh, boys?" Either to the supper or blessing we assented, joyfully; but when our chief asked who was for reconnoitring, the question was received in silence. "Suppose it is missed in the morning, I mean what we eat?" suggested some one, timidly. "Cats," settled Boston with laconic contempt. "But cats don't eat cheese and—" "Bah! Cats eat anything, from mice to stewed eel's feet. Who will follow if I lead?" "Couldn't you get in and hand something out?" asked another coolly. "Wish you may get it. Travers, you will follow, will you not?" "Yes," I replied with a little inward shudder. "Lead on, Macduff, and what you may call it. Be him that first cries hold enough." "Old enough for what?" queried the wit of the party. "Look here, Jenkins, don't you be a fool. This is not the time for vile puns, or Shakespeare either," with a frown at me. "It will take a jolly long time for us to all get in one after the other," I ruminated upon this snub. "And a jollier long time to get out, if we want to in a hurry," suggested the timid one. "That is true," agreed the chief. "We will toss up. An odd man goes in and hands out, eh?" Faint applause. But the idea was not carried out, because, upon reflection, we remembered Mother Kemp had our last coin. "Never mind," cried Boston, in his happy dare all way. "I'll do it. Lend me a back, somebody, and keep a sharp lookout, mind." We lent him a back with alacrity, it being a cheap and easy loan, and he drew himself up. "I see a pie!" he cried, and the words revived us. "Supposing it's a steak!" We supposed and felt more hungry than ever. Then we watched him with increased interest, as he squeezed his body through the casement, paused a moment to recover breath, descended gradually and carefully, and heavens, what was that? There was a scuffle and a gasp. Was it the doctor? I think at this juncture my knees began to tremble, so I cannot describe what the other sounds in the pantry were, at least, not with any accuracy. "I say," began some one of our party, he was always doing that, saying "I say," and stopping short. A nasty habit, you know, for when one's nerves are unstrung it makes you anxious, not to say alarmed. "Old Omega!" whispered another in an awed tone. "Can't be. There's no talking." "No, because he's such an artful old fox. He thinks he'll catch us all, eh?" The "eh" was to one who thought he had better go and see if the latter was there all right. It ended in their all going for the same commendable purpose, and leaving me behind to look after Boston. I was very much inclined to follow them, I confess, but I liked my friend too much to leave him, so having a regard for my own personal safety, I got behind a laurel and waited. Silence there, and nothing more. Could it be the doctor? Could the doctor keep his anger so long bottled up, even to catch the rest of us, without bursting? I thought not. He would have had a fit by this time. In those days I remember revolving in my mind the advantage I would gain if Dr. Omega did have a fit and died. It was very horrible of me, of course, but then I was a boy, and as I looked at the doctor's purple visage, was it colored by the liquid, etc.? I decided that if he were removed, no matter how, I might have a jolly holiday until another authority was placed over me, or I placed under another authority. Oh, it was wicked of me, I know, terribly wicked, but true. Mais revenons à Boston. If it was not the doctor in there with him, it may be the cook. I revolved behind the bushes. The cook ought to be in bed by this time, so ought I. I was not, that was a certainty. Perhaps the cook was not. If not, why it was very wrong of her not to be, I concluded virtuously. The moments passed and still no sound from the pantry of voices. Had Charlie fallen down in a fit instead of the doctor? I crept from my hiding places and essayed a faint whistle, recognizing us all as a call. No answer. "Boston!" I ejaculated, feeling sure now that the doctor could not possibly be there. Then, as I watched the casement as anxiously as any lover could that of his mistress, I saw something appear at it. By the light of the moon it looked black and shiny. If the shock had not deprived me of motion I should have fled. I could not flee, so I stood bravely to my post and shook like jelly. What was it? I felt like Hamlet when he saw the ghost of his father. But I did not apostrophize it. I knew better. At least I had not sufficient choice. Shakespearean language at my tongue's end to do so becomingly. Travers? Angels and ministers! My name in Boston's voice. In a moment the roaring in my ears ceased and my muscles gained strength. "Is that you, Charlie?" I asked, sensibly enough. "Phew!" Why, hang it, Boston, what's up, eh?" "Up! All over me, choking me, treacle!" gasped my friend. creeping through the windows with difficulty as he spoke, and losing his balance. As he reached the ground, he fell against me, stuck to me, disengaged himself, and finally stood upright. Treacle! I ejaculated with a roar, which even though the doctor might have heard, I could not suppress, as Charlie began clearing out his eyes and mouth with his already sticky fists. Yes, treacle, crossly. You needn't laugh at that, Bob, and make such a confounded fool of yourself, he growled. I stumbled somehow and fell face forward into a pan of it. Don't make such a row, Travers, as I continued my cachinnation and held my aching sides. I might have been smothered for all you would have cared. By Jove, smothered in treacle! What a butt of Malmsey would be a natural death in comparison. The treacle we have for our puddings and with our brimstone? I gasped at last. Yes. Here the ludicrous aspect of affairs struck the martyr, and he joined me in my merriment. I didn't know where I was going until I was in it, he continued. Ugh! I shall hate treacle like poison for the rest of my life. Where are the other fellows? Sneaked away, thought Omega had caught you. Cowards! At this moment a low whistle, a danger signal, from the boys just announced, caused us to hurry from the spot, and reaching the rope ladder, we were up it like cats, gaining our room just in time to find that, by the light shining under the door, some one was on the alert. Get under my bed, I whispered to Charlie, as his escape to his own room was cut off. In his hurry and confusion he got into it. I had no time to demur, and jumped in after him, just as the doctor, suspicious and austere, entered, candlestick in hand. Noise in number 3. Senior boy, report. I, senior boy, reported, and replied by nasal demonstration, which I flattered myself was a very good imitation of a sound snore. Robert Travers, in a voice which might almost have awakened the dead. Sir, replied I, Robert, as sleepily as I could. Somebody waking up this room and talking. If brevity is the soul of wit, then old Omega was the wittiest fellow I ever came across, although he never looked it. He always spoke sharply and to the point, and gave us our due in the same manner. Now as he jerked his sentence out, he approached nearer. Charlie, like a certain big bird, seemed to fancy that, because his own face was hidden and he could see no one, it followed that no one could see him, whereas half his head was exposed to view. I sat up in bed, hurriedly giving my companion a vicious kick of caution, as I explained to the doctor that little Simpson walked and talked in his sleep, at which little Simpson, in a corner of the room, groaned audibly. Simpson, junior, what do you mean by walking in your sleep, sir? Simpson groaned again, and the doctor, thinking he was snoring, continued. He eats too much. Must diet him. A dose of brimstone and treacle I felt Boston jump in the morning will do him good. Cooling. Remind me, Travers. By the way, sir, how come it you are awake? Please, sir, you woke me. Awaken me, sir, I stammered. Hem, doubtfully. Whom have you in bed with you, eh? As Boston, rendered uncomfortable by his sticky face, had moved. With me, sir? I murmured vaguely. Yes, sir, with you. Come on out, whoever it is, roared Omega, without further parley. But Boston remained still as a mouse. Struck dumb with anger and astonishment that a boy should have the impudence to stop in when he ordered him to come out, the doctor strode round to Charlie's side and laid hands on the miscreant to have him out by force. But no sooner than he felt the viscous state of our hero Then he withdrew him precipitately with the pious ejaculation, "Good heavens! What is the matter with him? Necessitas non habet legem." I, being senior boy, had to report. I did so, trembling, and imitated the doctor in my brevity. "Matter, sir. Treacle, sir." "Treacle!" in a voice of concentrated thunder, if you know what that is like. "His mother sent him a pot of treacle, sir, and he thought was pomatum, sir, and my imaginative powers fell before the lightning of the doctor's glance. "Whose mother?" "Boston's, sir." "Boston, come out!" And Boston, after some little delay caused in having to detach himself from his surroundings, came forth like a lamb I mean, like a black sheep. "What the But I drew a curtain over the rest. The doctor was profane, and he hurt my feelings very much. Poor old Treacle! The name stuck to him ever after. Well, I went to his wedding, and with the exception that at the critical part of the ceremony he dropped the ring, which, after we had all scrambled on our knees for, was found in the bride's veil, he went through the happiest day of his life, without a mistake. As for myself, in searching for that ring, I knocked my head against Treacle's sisters, and it upset me. A thrill went through me, which was most painfully pleasant. At the breakfast table I became sentimental. In making my speech for the ladies, I caught her, Treacle's sister's eye. She smiled, and I lost the thread of my discourse. It was a very slender thread, and I never found it again until one day I was wandering round somebody's garden with my arm round Treacle's sister's waist, and but that doesn't matter. She is a jolly little thing, though, Treacle's sister is. End of section 28. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Section 29 of Humorous Readings and Recitations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Humorous Readings and Recitations. Edited by Leopold Wagner. Section 29. The Voice of the Sluggard. By Anonymous. Have you brought my boots, Jeminiah? Leave them at my chamber door. Does the water boil, Jeminiah? Place it also on the floor. 8 o'clock already, is it? How's the weather? Pretty fine. 8 is tolerably early. I can get away by 9. Still I feel a little sleepy, though I came to bed at 1. Put the bacon on, Jeminiah. See the eggs are nicely done. I'll be down in 20 minutes, or if possible in less. I shall not be long, Jeminiah, when I once began to dress. She is gone, the brisk Jeminiah, she is gone, and little thanks. How the sluggard yearns to capture yet another 40 winks, since the bard is human only, not an early village cock. Why should he salute the morning at the hour of 8 o'clock? Stifled be the voice of duty, Prudence, prithee, cease to chide, while I turn me softly, gently, round upon my other side. Sleep, resume thy downy empire, reassert thy sable reign. Morphus, why desert a fellow? Bring those poppies here again. What's the matter, now, Jeminiah? 9 o'clock, it cannot be. Hast prepared the eggs, the bacon, and the matutinal tea? Take away the jug, Jemima, go replenish it anon, Since the charm of its caloric must be very near gone. She has left me, let me linger till she reappears again. Let me lazy thoughts meander in a free and easy vein. After sleep's profoundest solace, naught refreshes like the doze. Should I tumble off, no matter, she will wake me, I suppose. Bless me, it is you, Jemima. Mercy on us! What a knock! Can it be? I can't believe it. Actually 10 o'clock. I will out of bed and shave me. Fetch me warmer water up. Let the tea be strong, Jemima. I shall only want a cup. Stop a minute, I remember some appointment by the way. 'Twould have bought me mints of money. 'Twas for 10 o'clock to day. Let me drown my disappointment. Slumber in the seventh heaven. You may go away, Jemima. Come and call me at 11. From the Leeds Mercury. End of section 29. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.